I'd like to call to order the City of Las Vegas Historic Preservation Commission for August the 23rd, 2023. Please call the roll and determine if we have a quorum.
Thank you. Chair Stodel?
Present.
Vice Chair Laramie?
Here.
Commissioner Levine? He's running a little late. Commissioner Beck?
Here.
Commissioner Hotchkiss?
Here on the phone.
Commissioner Serfas? Commissioner Cosgrove?
Here.
Commissioner Palacios? Commissioner Moody?
Here.
Commissioner Perdue?
Here.
Commissioner Roberts?
Here.
Commissioner Seabrandt?
Here.
Commissioner Gillespie?
Here.
Thank you. We do have a quorum.
Thank you. Agenda item number 2, announcement regarding compliance with the open meeting law. Are we in compliance?
Yes, we are in compliance.
Thank you. Agenda item 3, public comment. Comment during this portion of the agenda must be limited to matters on the agenda for action. If you wish to be heard, come forward and give your name for the record. The amount of discussion, as well as the amount of time any single speaker is allowed, may be limited. Would anybody like to speak at this point? Seeing and hearing none, we'll move on to agenda item 4. This is the item that where the chair has announcements relative to the Historic Preservation Commission, and currently I have no announcements. Agenda item 5 for possible action to approve the final minutes by reference of the regular meeting of July 26, 2023. Would look for a motion to approve unless there are corrections or changes.
I move to approve the minutes from,
Commissioner Beck, I move to approve the minutes from the July meeting.
Commissioner
All right.
Cosgrove, second.
We have a motion for the discussion. General public? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Hotchkiss votes aye on the phone.
Those opposed? Motion carries unanimously with the chair voting in favor. Let's go on to agenda item 6. I'm sorry, please.
No, I'm item 7, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm a little ahead of myself. Oh, there is? Oh, okay.
Agenda item 6, 23-0295-HPC1. This is an abeyance item. Discussion for possible action regarding approval of the final intensive level survey of historic African American resources in West Las Vegas, and specifically in the neighborhood, an area roughly bounded by Cary Avenue, Bonanza Road, and Rancho Drive, and Interstate 15. Dr. Seabrandt?
Thank you, Seabrandt, for the record. So this is the final draft. The commission has already had the opportunity to review and comment on this survey. All those comments were provided back to the consultant, and the changes were made where appropriate, and now we're just here to hear the final wrap-up and if there were any final questions, and then final approval.
All right. Welcome. Your thoughts, comments, presentation?
Good afternoon, Commission and Chair. I am Courtney Mooney. I'm the project manager for this project with Northwind Resource Consulting. And firstly, I'd like to say thank you to everyone who submitted comments, and I could tell that you all read the document very thoroughly. They always go to make, a much better report, so I really appreciate that. And just give you a quick run-by of the SHPO comments. I'll just focus it on their more substantive comments, which were focused on a couple of eligibility questions. Yes. Oh, sorry about that. They had some questions about our recommendations for eligibility on 4 properties, which we, once we looked at their comments, we revised. So now there are a total of 9 properties as opposed to 6 that are determined eligible for listing in the National Register on the individual level. And so, of course, those are also added to the city eligibility list. And I would say that's probably the most substantive comments we received on the report. With the exception of Chair Stoldal's very thorough comments.
Great. I really enjoyed reading this report. I think it's going to stand the test of time as far as providing some additional clarity to the early years of the community that is west of the railroad tracks, and it's a great report. Look forward to any questions or comments from the commission. Please.
Commissioner Laramie, so I just had a question on the report. I know that you talked about the riots that occurred in the community after the Rodney King murder, and I remember I thought that riots also occurred in the community after the Martin Luther King assassination, potentially connected to the impending highway construction that was going to go through the community. So I guess just a request to look into that to see if that did occur, and if it did, to add that to the report.
Absolutely.
Great. Dr. Seabright, maybe you can, what's the next step with the recommendations that are in this report?
Seabright for the record. So what we will do is once we have the final printed, finalized copy, we will look to see what the recommendations are and to see if we can get funding to do an intensive level, or I'm sorry, to add those properties potentially on either the National Register and or our Las Vegas Register.
Would that be that we would look and see at one particular property that may stand out from the group of how many did you recommend?
We had 9 that we recommended eligible, individually eligible.
And was that including the ones from SHPO?
Yeah, there were 4 revisions from SHPO.
So
yeah.
Initially you had 5.
Well, initially we had 6. They had questioned one of the criteria that we recommended.
Okay. I guess the question is there one out of the 9 that is out that stands shoulders above the others that we should definitely make sure that we consider funded?
Yeah, so Seaborn for the record, so remember that this grant requires the submission of a nomination to the National Register, and that is the Christensen House. So it's already been reviewed preliminary by the National Park Service.
Okay.
They sent back some comments, and then that final document is also part of this backup. And so that is one we are required to submit to SHPO and the Keeper of the Register. Of course, that's going to take some time, and we won't know anything until sometime next year. But for the others that are listed as potentially eligible, we would have to take that next step and hire a consultant to write the nomination forms for the others if the owners were interested.
I guess I'm kind of getting really into the weeds. Out of the 9, we're down to 8 now because of the Christensen House, correct?
No, it's 9 in addition to the Christensen House.
And the Christensen
Yep,
House, so
in
there's
addition
10.
to, yeah. But we didn't include that in this report because that was a separate report.
So then, of those 9, what's the process to? Do we hire somebody to look at the 9 and say, this is the order you should fund? How do we get to the next step?
Well, the commission is welcome to send me any comments they have on that, any thoughts or opinions, and then we can compile that information and move forward from that point.
Okay, there's no real formal
Well,
criteria.
no. So we clearly want to put these on our local register, and that, of course, requires consent from the property owner.
Okay.
So that is going to be perhaps the biggest hurdle, is to have the consent to move forward with the nomination, since it does require compliance to our ordinance.
That's to get on the local register. To get on the national register doesn't require the property owner approve.
Well, the property owner can say they don't want to be on the register once SHPO advises them that it's going on the register, so they could still deny it. And that's what happened with the Victory Hotel many, many years ago, which I think Courtney may actually know about, and the owners did not wish to add that property, so it never went through.
So please, to the commission, take a look at the things that are within this, and if you have a specific recommendation, please send it to Dr. Seabrand for the next step. Anything else? Any other question from the commission?
Commissioner Roberts, for the record, just a follow-up to that, is there a plan in place or an intent to solicit the owners of these properties to encourage them to
Yeah,
add it to
we'll
the-
do another neighborhood meeting.
Okay, thank you.
All right, this is an action item. Look for a motion.
Commissioner Surface, I'll make a motion to approve.
All right, we have a motion.
I'll second Commissioner Roberts.
Further discussion of the commission? General public? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Hotchkiss,
Those opposed? Motion carries unanimously with the chair voting in favor. Thank you very much, Courtney. Great report, and look forward to the next project.
Thank you.
Agenda item 723-0391-HPC1, discussion for possible action regarding approval of a certificate of appropriateness, the application for the replacement of a residential roof on the property located at 1100 South 6th Street. Dr. Seabrand.
Seabrand, for the record, thank you. So number 7 and number 8 are related numbers, but they do require separate votes. So this item is for the certificate of appropriateness for the replacement of this roof, and the applicant is going to be replacing it like for like. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Ganson for any questions.
Great. And for the commission, as Dr. Seabrand pointed out, there are two elements to this. And the first one of the certificate of appropriateness, when this came before us at our last meeting, we kind of mixed 7 and 8 together. The focus here is whether or not this particular project should get a certificate of appropriateness. Welcome.
No, thank you. Mike Ganson, 1100 South 6th Street. I request your approval for the grant, because I need a new roof, and I do have the matching funds. And the certificate of appropriateness. Excuse me. That's what I'm here to lobby for, is my certificate of appropriateness.
Have you had a chance to go through, stole off of the record, the idea is that this is a historic neighborhood, and
Yes.
the idea is to maintain that sense of the community. And the staff has reviewed this project and is supporting this certificate of approval, that it fits all the fundamental criteria. Questions from the commission?
Commissioner Perdue, what is the substance or the material of the shingle?
The substance of the material.
Fiberglass asphalt shingle, and that's what's there now, but it's just worn out. I have maintained the property since I've had it to its similar look. So I take my historic preservation seriously, and maintain the property as per the codes.
No, I'm talking about the substance of the new shingle, the material. Is it an asbestos? Is it a tile? What?
It's fiberglass asphalt.
Okay.
It's a tile. It's a shingle.
Okay.
It's a 3-tab roofing material. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
How long was the previous roof up?
I don't know. I've had the house for 23 years, so it's been there. It needed a roof when I bought it, so it really needs one now. So
Great.
it's and I've patched the flat roof part of the house I've taken care of that because that was in a sieve. So I've taken care of the flat roof part, which is the tan part that you see there, that with the chimney sticking out of it. And that's what the house needs. You can see that there's some missing shingles on the roof to the right of the main property. That's above the garage.
Commissioner?
Any questions?
Commissioner Roberts, pardon me. Is the roof leaking now, or is it starting to fail, you're saying, or?
Well, yeah, it leaked 2 nights ago.
Oh, that's no good.
So,
I saw the scope of work is identified as just the roof. Are they doing anything with the underlayment, like the substrate, the plywood below? I would assume there's plywood or battens below.
yeah, the whole roof is going to be removed, and then they're going to put an underlayment down. They're going to put a patch on all the valleys, so put some reinforcing in the valleys, and then they'll put a substrate down of whatever the code is.
The reason I'm asking about the hard substrate, the underlayment, the plywood or OSB, whatever they use, is noting where you're. It's an opportunity here that I just wanted to share. Noting where your HVAC systems are, where your condensers are on the roof. They are slightly visible from the street, which isn't usually preferred, and it might be an opportunity to adjust them and just reroute the plenums a foot or two, and maybe closer to that, a little bit lower and closer to the flat roof. It'd be a very small amount of effort, and it would increase the visual. It would hide them from the public view. So if they are doing all that work and they're up there, I also noticed that your contractor has an HVAC license as well. You have a very good contractor tied to this. So it's something that I would suggest that you have them look at. It probably wouldn't be a very significant cost increase since they're already there. Most of that cost would simply be access to it, but if they're providing full access there, it would actually be a great opportunity for you.
Well, maybe back in the day, I guess you haven't been to the store lately. Things are very expensive now, just to touch anything. The cost of my roof is almost doubled in the last maybe 3 years since I've gotten a bid on it. And the idea to touch this air conditioning, which it is visible from the Park Paseo side, not on the, and that's been there for, since it's been put in.
Sure.
And it's just the idea of moving that there's all ductwork tied to it also. So it isn't really simple, whether it's not flex duct.
Right.
So it's hard ducting.
Yes, the plenums, that's what I'm speaking of. So it'd be a very short run to reroute those plenums and add 2 or 3 feet and move the condensers inbound so they wouldn't be visible from either side of the street.
I can get you a price, but I'm sure it's not going to be within the amount that we have budgeted. We have budgeted for the roof. We have a $10,000 grant. Sure. I'm getting close to $9,000 contribution. I think it'll be more than $2,000 to even touch that air conditioning problem. I mean, it's the way the house has been since the 50s. And
I think that the question here is not whether this is a requirement to get a certificate of appropriateness. It was simply a suggestion that maybe a question, and all of a sudden, if it brings the price in that doesn't fit the budget, understand that. It was simply an observation.
Okay.
And not a requirement, just a question.
Yeah. I'll look into it for you, though.
Sure. Thank you. Jack?
Jack Levine, for the record. What's on the house now is a three tab flat roof.
Correct.
All right. I would surmise that the original roof on this house from the 60s was actually a wooden shake roof, and so the material you're using, that's the pictures on the right, is sometimes called an architectural 3-tab or a dimensional 3-tab, and I think even more appropriate than what's on the roof now. So I'm all in favor of it. Thank you.
Oh, good. Yeah, it was originally shake, because there's a whole bunch of it up in my attic that I removed.
Yeah, but the dimensional is more representative of the look of the original shake, and
Right.
in my opinion,
The
more
new
appropriate.
roof is.
Yeah, more appropriate.
All right, look, further questions? If not, would look for a motion.
And what's unique about the house, that it has the crisscross windows are truly real crisscross windows, that they're individual panes with individual pieces of glass that have different dimensions.
Yeah.
And I've maintained that. It's a beautiful white oak. I've painted it and sealed it, and it's truly a unique item that in the whole neighborhood. There isn't anything else like it there.
Yeah, there's a few.
And the
but-
garage
but-
doors, I rebuilt them as they were, and maintain them.
Mr. Chair, I move to approve item 7.
For the record, Jack Levine, I second.
We have a motion, we have a second. Further discussion? General public? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Hotchkiss votes aye on the phone.
Those opposed? Motion carries unanimously with the chair voting in favor. Thank you, and let's move on to the second part of yours, which is, now that you have the certificate of appropriateness, you're going to be seeking the funds to do that. So that's item number 8, 23-0392-HPC1, discussion for possible action regarding approval of a grant in the amount of $8,690 to Michael Granson for the replacement of a residential roof located at 1100 South 6th Street, and authorizing the chair to execute the grant agreement as approved by the city attorney. Dr. Seabrand, anything you want to add at this point?
Seabrand for the record. No, I think we've covered everything during the certificate of appropriateness. This is the same project. It's just this is the part asking for the matching funds on the grant.
Further questions from the commission? If not, we'd look for a motion.
Commissioner Laramie, I do have a few questions.
Okay.
So I just noticed on the quote you have that there's an in-kind donation of a little over $3,000. I'm curious what that is and if that has potential to, creep back into the budget.
I beg your pardon?
I noticed on your contractor quote here, there's like $3,000 that are listed in kind donation. I was wondering
Correct.
what that in kind donation is.
All I can say is that the contractor is making that donation back to one of the other people involved, which is Rebuild Together, which is a tax-free organization that helps people like me that need a roof, that they do work all over the valley. And I hope that this exercise will encourage more people to take advantage of this government program. And all I can understand is that out of the total bill that they're going to return $3,000 back to Let's Build Together. That's where the money's going to go, is Let's Build Back Together. So it'll go back to the .org, that they're going to make a contribution as part of their billing.
Gotcha. So it's like a discount they're giving you and then a donation they're making towards another
Correct.
Organization. Okay. And then just a question for Diane. The grant is reimbursable, correct? So it's paid out after the project's completed and receipts are submitted?
That's correct. And I'm in constant communication with Rebuilding Together, and they are the organization that is making this match, and our grants do not require the owner to make that match. The match can come from any funding source, is which this one is coming from. And so they will send me the receipts as far as the work once it's completed, and then we reimburse them. And the same with Mr. Ganson, who is will send us the receipts, and we'll reimburse him.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Further discussion? Look for a motion.
Jack Levine, for the record, move to approve.
We have a motion to approve. Further discussion by the commission? General public? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Hotchkiss votes aye on the phone.
Those opposed? Motion carries unanimously with the chair voting in favor. And thank you for all the work you put in and becoming the
Yes,
second
it's very
person to
exciting.
take
Thank you very
advantage
much.
of this opportunity. Let's move on to agenda item number 9, which is 23-0419-HPC1. This is a report by the Community Development Department regarding the Floyd Lamb Park Skeet Range located at 9200 Tule Springs Road. Dr. Seabrand?
Thank you, Seabrand, for the record. And this is just a report, as the chairman said. So the old skeet range at Floyd Lamb Park is not part of the historic fabric of this property. It was a later building and quite contemporary. And the range is contaminated from the shotgun shell residue and the clay pigeons, and it has been closed off from the public for several years. Last year, our Public Works did a partial remediation of this part of the skeet range, and that's the red arrow pointing to the asphalt part of the original part of where the skeet range was. And then the yellow part with the yellow outline is the rest of the remediation, and that is what their Public Works still has it out for bid for a contractor to come do the work, but this is the area that will be removed, and it entails the old skeet range as far as there's rifle stands, there's the sidewalk, there's the lamp posts, and the only structure on the property is this one on the right side of your screen. It's a contemporary building that was part of the range, as far as we don't have an exact date on that, but again, it's not historic. Because the park does have covenants with SHPO. SHPO did approve this already, and this is for the commission's information only.
Questions? Please.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Commissioner Moody. I looked at the backup material and couldn't tell, but what's been remediated already is, you mentioned asphalt. What will happen with the remaining 33 acres, I forget?
Well, because it's a contaminated site, so it's going to be blocked off from the public, and that parking area that they've have asphalted over, they could use that for any type of overflow parking or emergency parking if they need be, but it will just be closed to the public.
So even after it's remediated, it'll remain closed?
For now. I mean, there may be plans down the road, but for now, there are no plans to reuse that land.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Regarding the Tule Springs Park, Dr. Seabrand, you mentioned they're working on that. There was a public announcement by Parks and Rec, I believe, that said that they're looking at all of the buildings on that site, potential restoration or repair. Will this commission be able to get an update or a presentation on that?
Yes, of course. So they are still looking for the contractor to do a building assessment. So they need a building assessment before they can do the actual restoration work. So as soon as they have that, we'll have them come in here and provide a report to the HPC.
Great, thank you. Further comments, questions? Otherwise, we'll move on. Let's move on to agenda item number 10, which is 23-0417-HPC1, discussion for possible action regarding approval of the submission of a grant proposal in the amount of $45,000 to the Nevada State Historic Preservation Office. This is part of the sub-grant program in order to hire a consultant to create a workshop to inventory the historic grave markers located at Woodlawn Cemetery, 1500 Las Vegas Boulevard North. Dr. Seabrand, please.
Thank you, Seabrand, for the record. So this is the annual sub-grants that are put out by SHPO for all CLGs to apply for. And the idea for this fiscal year, is to do the project at Woodlawn Cemetery. And SHPO does have new requirements of what type of projects they will accept. And one of that is community involvement and engagement with historic preservation. So we would like to do this specific project as inventorying there's thousands of headstones and gravestones there, so we can't do all of it at once. So we will start with the earliest gravestones and do a inventory, do a conditions assessment of the markers, and that will and look at the histories, if available, for the individuals that are interred there, since they are mostly the pioneers that founded the city as early as 1905. And we would just need to put out an RFP to solicit proposals from different firms, and we wouldn't really see anything come through here till sometime after spring of next year, just due to the length of time it takes to go through certain internal approvals.
Comments, thoughts?
Question, Commissioner Roberts, for the record, is this is for the plan or the implementation of the workshop?
The implementation, I mean, we would do the workshop.
So, okay, and would the workshop be like ongoing annually or monthly or for a certain amount of time, or?
Well, so we will ask the firms to put that in their proposal of how many workshops they can do, how many, I mean, it would be multiple workshops.
Right.
And then, I mean, the funding's only going to last that so long just to fund that initial part. So we see this as kind of a phased program where once we have this part done, then we'll move on to the other parts of the cemetery. And eventually, and it's going to take a long time because, again, there's thousands of individuals buried there, that we finally have the entire cemetery inventoried.
So would I be correct saying that this is would be for a phase one? Is that kind of and then when you could, for the one section, and then as more funding comes through, it'd be for other sections of the
yes,
cemetery, is that correct? Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Laramie, just kind of building off Commissioner Roberts' comments, it would be, potentially interesting in the scope to maybe think about how the consultant could maybe set up a methodology for future community involvement. I know, Nevada Preservation Foundation has had a lot of success with their Woodlawn Cemetery and volunteers being interested. I remember one of our recent award winners kind of talking about his own research there too. So I think there's probably a large interest from the community and potential to kind of keep that research going out after the contract, especially if there's, like a do-it-yourself guide or something that the community could reference.
The challenge that that I see when we use the term the earliest, or start with the earliest, is that's not at any one particular location. And the earliest are scattered all through the site. So how are they going to? What are we going to use as a guidepost? Is I know there's a website that lists all of the, or at least a significant number, but you have the black community was confined to one area, the Jewish community to another area, and I guess really the more important, that the plan will come out of the workshop, correct? Okay.
Correct. So sorry, I don't have a slide for this, but I do have a overhead if you want to see it. The cemetery is, well, let me put it up on here. So the cemetery burial plots are either alphabetical letters or their names of gardens. And we do have records of the dates when many of the earliest burials occurred there, and they are in this area. Right in this area right here.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. In this area right here. So this is where we would start. We would concentrate on this and move forward from that. But we would have the consultant do, obviously we would have to do a walkthrough of the cemetery with them in order to get the, as Vice Chair Laramie was saying, the methodology of how this is going to be done.
Further questions, comments? Just a quick comment on the great work that the city is doing with Woodlawn, taking it over the last couple of years and preserving it, and upgrading it, and keeping it headed in the right direction. This sounds like another great project to recognize and preserve the history. There's some very influential early pioneers that are at the site, as well as a number of interesting stories. Look forward to the workshop and the action plan that comes out of that. Further questions, comments? Would look for a motion then to approve.
Commissioner Perdue, motions to approve.
All right.
Commissioner Cosgrove, second.
I have a motion. Further discussion? General public? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Hotchkiss votes aye on the phone.
Those opposed? Motion carries unanimously with the chair voting in favor of those in attendance and on the telephone. Thank you. Let's move on then to agenda item 11, which is 23-0429-HPC1. Discussion for possible action regarding approval of the amount of $2,000 for the Historic Preservation Office to attend the Old Spanish Trail National Conference in Riverside, California, October 19th through the 20th of this year. Dr. Seabrand?
Thank you, Seabrand, for the record. So this is an annual conference that Chairman Stodel made me aware of, and it is dedicated to the Old Spanish Trail. Of course, parts of the Spanish Trail did route through Las Vegas. You can still see several stone markers that mark the spot of the Spanish Trail. One is over at the Old Mormon Fort. And this conference is for individuals and the caretakers in our surrounding states of that also have portions of the trail going through their states. And we've never been to this before, so it would be prudent that we check it out. So I will go there and see what type of a conference it is and what we can do with it in the future, if we can get some ideas of what we can do to promote and make more aware of our portion of the Spanish Trail, and look a little bit deeper into that very early history of the city.
Great. Questions, comments? Please.
Commissioner Gillespie, for the record. I'm really pleased to see you're going to go try this out, because January 26th, the Nevada State Museum Las Vegas will be opening an original exhibit called Old Spanish Trail, Connecting a Network of Paths. So we'll have original artifacts going from Old Santa Fe all the way over to the mission in San Gabriel, California. So probably good for Joseph Diaz and you perhaps to compare notes before you head out.
And of course, it will be factually correct as opposed to what the myths that are going on and have been perpetuated over years.
Commissioner Gillespie also wanted to add, there is a place on the Springs Preserve campus that is one of the little pathways, and so we are working with Nathan Harper to see if we can get some visitor public plaques to commemorate another place that it intersects.
All right, that's great. An important part of Southern Nevada history. Further questions? If not, look for a motion.
Commissioner Moody, move to approve item 11.
Commissioner Surface, I'll second it.
We have a motion, we have a second. Further discussion? Hearing none, all those, general public? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Hotchkiss votes on the phone.
Those opposed? Motion carries unanimously with the chair voting with those in attendance and on the telephone. Item number 13 on the agenda, item number 12, report by the Community Development Department regarding the director's update. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Seth, well, I sit so far down there, I thought I would stand up here so you guys don't have to crane your necks, especially Commissioner Roberts over here on the other side. I do have, Seth Floyd for the record, I do have one update for the group. It's something we've talked about, well, I learned yesterday, we've maybe been talking about this for the last decade or more, but our demolition ordinance, it's something that's come up since I've been in this role, and even when I was sitting in the city attorney's seat over the last few years. It's come up several times about should we introduce a demolition ordinance? What's the purpose of it? How do we protect older buildings? Ultimately, I think is the goal of the demolition ordinance. Diane, over the last year or two, has done some pretty exhaustive research from some other cities, primarily in the West, San Antonio, Austin, Texas, Phoenix. There's a few cities in the Southwest that have demolition ordinances or something like them. We drafted the ordinance. My staff prepared the ordinance. We had it ready to go. We had a sponsor on the city council. That's one of the things we briefed this group on, that we would need to get a sponsor. And then as we were sitting down going through it kind of with a fine-tooth comb and working out the mechanics of how it was going to work, my team asked a very good question, which is this really the best way to achieve the preservation that we're looking for? And I wanted to report to you all that the answer was no, but I don't want you to think that means we don't care about preserving old buildings. That's not what it means. In fact, we've done several things that I think actually replace the demolition ordinance with something that's even more effective, and I wanted to go through quickly what those things are. The first one is Diane is now included as a matter of internal policy in all of the demolition permit reviews for any structure that is over 40 years old. So anytime that a developer or property owner submits a permit for demolition for a building that's over 40 years old, she is automatically included in that review process. And not to get too much in the weeds, but anytime you submit for a building permit, there are several reviewers that have to check the box before that demolition permit gets issued. Diane is now in that process and is automatically included. So what that means is, and demolition permits typically get issued in as short a time as 48 hours. That's about the quickest they can get issued. But in that 48 hours, Diane is able to review the property, determine whether she needs to go out and do further review, in which case she can withhold her checkbox until she can get out and do it. So it actually gives her quite a bit of control in that process. Now, most of these, we've talked about this and we've looked at the last few, she's able to get, typically if it comes in during the work week, she's able to get out there the next day and document the property, do some research on it. So that's part one. That's on the process side. On the other side, one of the things that we've been working on and we'll be going to Centennial Commission with is a request for some additional resources to help Diane on the front end actually do the survey work of the buildings in the neighborhoods that are historic or potentially historic, to identify those buildings or those neighborhoods that can be added to our local, the state, or the national register. Because really that is a better way to preserve buildings than just, you get all the way to the finish line, someone's got the bulldozers ready, and you say, oh wait, hold on, this is historic, will you please not do this? At that point, that's not the most effective time to do that outreach. So we are putting an emphasis on getting to these properties on the front end to document them so that we can preserve them and work with the owners ahead of time when there might still be a chance to preserve them and find a viable use, reuse, or even down to preserving, we talked about this during our agenda review yesterday, even preserving architectural elements. Commissioner Roberts, I know we've talked about that, doors, plumbing fixtures, electrical outlets, and anything that might represent something historic. Working on that on the front end is actually, I think, a better, more effective way to get those things preserved. So I wanted to brief this group. I wanted to give you a thorough briefing because I know this is something that has been on the radar for a while. It's come on, it's come off. We've had some stops and starts, but after really digging into it, our team felt that the most effective way was to do a two-pronged approach, focusing more on the front end and then plugging Diane into the process. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. And of course, we will always evaluate this on a regular basis. If this is not working, we'll go back to the drawing board, and the ordinance is drafted. It's figuratively sitting on a shelf that we could pull right back off the shelf, but I think this is going to be a better way to do it. Thank you.
Comments?
Commissioner Roberts for the record. So, thanks for the update. I wanted to ask, so just wanted to clarify, is 48 hours still the timeline then? It's not a 10-day timeline that was discussed?
Yeah, so yes, the short answer is yes. The 10-day was what we were going to build into the demolition ordinance as the required waiting period.
Okay.
As it turns out, I mean, Diane typically does her review much quicker than that anyway, but that was what we agreed to. And this will not alter, maybe a better way to answer it is, this will not alter the standard timeline for issuing a demo permit.
Okay, thank you. I had another question as well. So this would essentially be the review or the notice to Diane and other members of the city would only occur if someone was to pull a permit. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So for the hundreds, if not thousands, of bad actors in the city who are actively flipping houses or just doing their work and asking for forgiveness later, we still don't have a process to identify or address that ongoing epidemic, correct?
So I wouldn't say we don't have a process. It's obviously not a formal process, because if somebody does something without permit, the permit is that's the trigger that alerts us that something is happening. Just like any violation of city code, yes, we do end up sort of chasing those with code enforcement or license compliance if it's a licensing issue. So the demo ordinance, though, wouldn't have addressed those either, because what triggers the 10-day period under the demo ordinance would also be someone pulling permits. If someone doesn't pull permits, I mean, unfortunately, this board sees this all the time. Someone does the work, gets caught down the road, and then they're here before you trying to do it backwards.
Right.
The same thing would happen with someone doing a demo without a permit.
Would there be any, this will be my last one, I promise, will there be any, or would there be any interest or appetite for the city to try and address this? It's somewhat of an overlap. It's not directly the exact same. Some of this is not necessarily demolition, but it's demolition in part by in the way of destroying or historic elements or architectural defining features, say, of a residence or something like that. I would encourage the city to spend some time thinking about how best to address that, and the only way that I could see that happening is a more of a proactive as opposed to a reactive approach. I don't have the solution, but I have a lot of opinions as to, because I see it personally on both sides of the wrecking ball, so to speak.
Yeah, so I think we do, well, that's a tough thing to be, code enforcement generally is a tough thing to be proactive and in front of, because it's hard to be everywhere all the time seeing all of the violations going on. On the historic preservation piece specifically, though, we have two things that I do think help with that. It'd be hard to pull numbers on this because, again, you're chasing all the time. But one thing that, when code enforcement got fully staffed, which they are almost fully staffed for the first time in the 2.5 years I've been here, they're very close to being fully staffed now. We have an officer who's specifically focused on the kind of east of Las Vegas Boulevard to about, I forget exactly where his area ends, but it includes several neighborhoods that are either historic or have older homes that are probably eligible to be historic. And the goal there was, this is kind of a unique portion of our code that you all and that Diane deal with, but was to assign one person to that area so they can get to know that a little bit better instead of having them cover a huge area where this is just one little piece of a much larger space. I think that has helped, at least with coordination with neighborhoods. John S. Park, for example, he goes to all the neighborhood meetings with John S. Park, and I'm pretty sure leadership over there, I'm looking at Diane to confirm, but I think their leadership has his number on speed dial. And so he gets to know that neighborhood a little bit better, which helps to at least get a little bit ahead of some of these issues. We're still mostly reactive, but at least there's a familiarity with those neighborhoods. The other thing that we are in the process of right now is when we develop design guidelines for at least our registered historic neighborhoods, and that's not going to help some of your neighborhoods that aren't registered necessarily, but with better design guidelines, we at least have the teeth that when we do catch someone, we can be more specific about what needs to be done to fix it. Which is easier for Diane and for code enforcement to hold them to that. So it's not going to get all the way to the solution you're talking about, but I think that does help, and it gives us some tools to do it.
Jack?
Jack Levine for the record. I was going to bring this up in the future items in a few minutes, but last week there was a big scare that went out on Facebook about the Sky Ranch and the Safari signs in the old motels out in the 2000 block of Fremont Street. It was first reported that they were destroyed, all right, meaning they were gone. I went over there personally and talked to somebody there who says they're being restored. Do architectural elements like the old neon signs and facades and all that come under the demolition at all with something like that? If they wanted to take those signs down, would they need a demolition permit for that, or is that does that count as demolition?
Yeah, if I can pivot to a different example, because the signs are unique. How long do you have? Diane can give you a whole dissertation on those particular signs. The signs on East Fremont are part of a program. Centennial Commission gave money for a good chunk of those to restore those. There's a separate agreement for maintenance on those. So
but that's the enchilada.
That's project. The enchilada part. So removing those signs has its own
Maryland
process.
Parkway. This is out past Bruce Street.
So with other signs that aren't part of the enchilada project, that's a good, if they are, depending on the type of, that's a good question. I don't know I would think you would need to pull a demo, there's electrical in most of those signs. So they should be pulling demo permits if they're removing it. Now, I don't know how often they just pull a sign down, unless it's just for maintenance, which wouldn't require the demo permit. Usually it's tied, like the Safari, for example, did a pretty large renovation, so there were permits for the project on that particular one because they did an entire overhaul of that property, added sprinklers and a variety of other things. So I will say, though, we have talked a lot about this because Las Vegas has a lot of historic signs. Obviously, we have a whole neon museum devoted to it. We have yet to identify signs and designate them historic. In the section of code that applies to the HPC, we can designate objects, buildings, and signs are actually specifically called out as something we can designate as historic. And I think when we have the resources to start doing the proactive surveying and try to get as much survey as possible, that's absolutely something we should look at because there are a lot of signs that should have that designation, which would give them the oversight and protection of this board.
All right. Yeah, I'd certainly like to see that happen. Yeah. I'm told now that all the neon was removed and some painting was done, but that signs are being restored, those two signs.
Which you're talking about, the Safari and
the Sky Ranch next door to it.
I don't know about the Safari is being restored, I believe, right? Yeah, that one I think got a Centennial grant to restore that sign. The Sky Ranch, I'm not familiar.
The person I spoke to was at Sky Ranch. They told me the sign was being restored, as well as, and they mentioned the Safari next door.
Okay, we'll take a look at the Sky Ranch. The Safari is being restored. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
And that property's in service right now. They renovated, it's being used.
Both seem to be in service. And
I'll
have to look at the Sky Ranch. I'm not as familiar with that one.
Yeah, thank you for the update. A couple of my areas that for years we've focused on historic preservation, and you use the word buildings. And that could be either because of the architecture or that some cultural or historic event took place at this site, for example, the old fort. But I felt for a long time that we're missing another significant opportunity, and that is, and you brought it up, are the artifacts, and rather than just massively taking a wrecking ball and tearing something down, whether or not there are elements of, whether it's the work of the carpenter or the plumber or the electrician that goes back to those early days of Las Vegas. And of course, the early days of Las Vegas are changing a bit, as you said, 40 years, but that's the 1980s. I think there needs to be another filter on that, and that is, what are the buildings that are, using 1905 as a starting point, what are the buildings that are the 30s, the 40s, or the 50s? How many of those are left in this community that may not represent, they may only represent a time period rather than something architecturally interesting or culturally that happened there? I think we need to look into that and potentially get a hold of some place like the Central Labor Council and see if there's some interest in that they could provide a volunteer or somebody that would provide the expertise in saying, okay, that building was built in 1925. These are the elements that maybe we can preserve out of that, this historic building artifact. So I just want to throw that item that's out there, the two elements of maybe getting a survey of determining the buildings that were built before 1950 or 1940 that are still here, maybe put some energy, some focus on that as well. I don't think there are that many that are still here. So those were my two comments. We have this commission does the 11 most endangered, and that's really an educational as opposed to necessarily a call to action. It's more of something we need to be watching these buildings, but maybe we also need to be watching those buildings that are built pre-50. So other thoughts, comments? Please.
Commissioner Laramie. So I guess I'm a little confused because my understanding of the process prior to, the conversation of the demo ordinance is that Diane already was involved, or was at least supposed to be involved, to be able to do a little research and talk with the property owner. So how exactly is it different? And, I guess, how exactly do we think that, it will work better with what you're proposing or what you've done?
Sure, yeah, and I think I just realized in your question, I think I might have been a little loose with the timeline. We added Diane as we were working through the process over about the last year and a half of developing the demo ordinance. We did go ahead and add, that's not something we're going to do, we already did add Diane to that permit review process, so I may have been a little off on my timeline. So we already added her. So to answer the first part of your question, she was added probably within the last year or so. And I don't know how many reviews she's actually done now that she's been added to the process. To the second part of your question, I think that process is equivalent to having the demo review. The challenge when our staff, and we had building and safety staff and planning staff kind of go through the ordinance and talk through how it would work, it would likely slow, and there's a balance that we struck here between not slowing down projects that are at the ready, but also making sure we preserve the history. And the way to preserve the history was to send Diana out to do a review. Because that's already happening, all the demo ordinance did was add time to a potential development project that didn't do anything for historic preservation. So that's what I meant by we think this process is better. Because it preserves Diane's ability to go out and hold up the building permit process if necessary to do the review before the demolition, but also not putting an artificial timeline on how long that demo would be delayed. So that's what I meant by better.
Okay.
And also combining that with the proactive, putting some resources toward a proactive approach of actually going out and surveying in advance so that we know what these properties are before they are right at the finish line to get demolished. And the example that we always use is the Weekirk of the Heather. That example comes up a lot. That made the news. That was one that we took a look at. I think that may have actually restarted the conversation on the demo ordinance most recently. So for example, on that one, in fact, I think that's one where they didn't ask for a demo permit. I can't remember if they got a demo permit or not. So not sure we would have gotten to that one anyway, but had we done some proactive surveying of whatever, and we could pick categories as Bob suggested, which might be helpful, years of service, year built, and start there. But that one certainly would have been surveyed, I think, if we had that proactive program in place. It's a pretty prominent one.
Okay. And I guess I just also wanted to add, I know you said, like, in this, more upfront and proactive approach, focusing on buildings that, would potentially qualify for register nominations. I think that, at least for me, adaptive reuse of buildings was a big part of the demo ordinance. So, especially in areas where, like, you may not have necessarily like the most pristine example or, high-end, if you will, example, but where you have a good quality and kind of, density of different buildings that really personify a certain time and period in Las Vegas. I think it is important to do upfront work and proactive work on those buildings as well. So I hope we don't just focus on the very few that rise to the top, but kind of the general landscape of Las Vegas.
That's an excellent point. And in our agenda review yesterday, I mentioned 40 years old because under the code, that's what, the purview of this board is buildings, objects, and those historic sites that are 40 years and older. That's what you have jurisdiction over. I think to Mr. Stodall's point when he said, 40 years ago is the 80s, well, that's a lot of buildings now we're talking about. We would, I'm sure, have to break those down into categories as you described, and it's either you start with the oldest first, or as you said, you pick some sort of defining characteristic and you look at groups of buildings or objects or places that personify that. We need to get Diane some help to do that. If you've ever been to her office, her list is in about 3-point font, and I have to get my reading glasses to see it, and I feel like every time she erases something, she puts something up there. So we got to get her some help, and then we need to define those parameters and do exactly what you said, whether it's in a year range or if it's a type of building, and I think that's how we can be pretty effective.
Yeah, and this is maybe off topic, but just a thought among that, other communities, I know LA did like the Survey LA, which was a community-wide survey approach to help them prioritize some of their preservation efforts. So maybe just thinking about future CLG grant projects, and if there is that focus on community nexus now, that could be, a potential to, obviously more work would have to be done after that, but could help us maybe make some of those priorities.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I see Diane taking notes, so it's on. She's going to put that on her board in 2-point font.
Other questions? If not, thank you very much. Really appreciate the update. Thank you. Let's move on then to agenda item 14, which is 23-0418 HPC1, report by Community Development Department regarding historic and archaeological resources in the local media. You have that packet before you.
We skipped one. We're on item 13.
Item 13? I think I purposely skipped that. Let's move back to item number 13, which is a report by the Community Development Department regarding the project update list. Dr. Seabrant, sorry about skipping you.
That's okay. Thank you, Seabrant, for the record. So everything is in progress right now. We did have our neighborhood meeting on August 16th for the Twin Lakes survey area. We did not have a very large turnout, but the few people that did attend were very interested in learning what it meant to be a historic district and how the process worked. And Courtney, who was just here, Courtney from North Winds, is also working on that project. So her and their historian were at the meeting, and we had some really good engagement. The neighbors took back a load of literature to share with their neighbors, and it was a successful meeting. Everything else is in progress. The one update I do have is the Historic West Side School Centennial Celebration. So that is happening on Saturday, September 30th. It starts with a parade at 10 a.m. and then a festival from 11 to 4. So unless I can get a bunch of volunteers to be in the parade, the HPC won't be in the parade, but we will have a booth and table at the festival. And that is where we will be giving out literature about historic preservation, as well as some giveaways that we have. And I would greatly appreciate anybody that would be willing to volunteer, because Teresa and I will be there all day long, and it would be great to have some of our commissioners be part of that. You don't have to volunteer for the entire time of 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., but if several of you could dedicate a couple hours or even an hour here and there to help us man that table and answer questions. We do expect a big turnout. We have been heavily advertising it, and please email me and Teresa if you can help us out for that. And as part of the celebration, we will have a part of the opening of the festival is, of course, the land acknowledgement. And in order to prepare for that, we do have a cultural protocol training scheduled for Tuesday, September 19th, here in City Council chambers from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. And that is when our consultant, Fawn Douglas, will be giving a presentation on what to expect during that part of the ceremony, the appropriate way to interact with the tribal elders who will be in attendance. This is a protocol training that we have opened to the entire city, and we're opening it obviously to the HPC, and we truly do hope that everybody does attend, especially if you're not familiar with the indigenous peoples that that we share this land with, and we'll be able to give you some insight on a culture and to enrich your mind. As a Historic Preservation Commission, we of course preserve all history. So happy to answer any questions.
Comments, thoughts? If not, thank you, Dr. Seabrand. Any further on item 13?
That's everything.
Item 14, 23-0418 HPC1. This is the report by the Community Development Department regarding historical and archaeological resources in local media. You have that before you. Any questions on that? Let's move on then to the next item, which is 15, discussion regarding a topic for future agenda items. Any future agenda items? Hearing and seeing none, I think we already have a list of things for almost for the rest of the remainder of the year, projects that we'll hear later on through at least October. Item 16, which is citizens' participation. Public comment during this portion of the agenda must be limited to matters within the jurisdiction of the committee. No subject may be acted upon by the committee unless that subject is on the agenda and is scheduled for action. If you wish to be heard, come forward and give your name for the record. The amount of discussion on any single subject, as well as the amount of any time any single speaker is allowed, may be limited. And when the word in item 16 says by committee, I think that it certainly means commission. Any comments? Anything else? All right, let's move on then to agenda item 17. We're adjourned.
Well, that was a quick meeting.